Three young disabled girls pushed through the busy park, turned away again and again as they asked for a place to rest. Finally, they stopped in front of a quiet man on an empty bench. One of them gathered her courage. "Sir, is anyone sitting here? Everyone else told us to leave." That whisper stopped him cold. But what happened in the next few minutes would uncover a secret so dark it would change his life forever. Before we begin, tell us which city you're watching from. It's heartwarming to see how these stories of hope can bring us all together, no matter the distance. Enjoy the story, everyone. The spring afternoon light settled over Crestwood Park like a warm blessing, filtering through branches heavy with cherry blossoms just beginning to open. Pale petals drifted in slow spirals, landing on benches, pathways, and the soft green grass that stretched toward the fountain. It was the kind of day that should have felt peaceful, even hopeful. But for Evan Hale, sitting alone on a long wooden bench in his navy suit, peace was something he could observe, never touch. His Rolex caught flashes of sunlight as he closed a thick binder filled with numbers, contracts, projections, things he understood, things he controlled. And yet, a single unexpected sound could undo him. He proved it moments earlier. A young family had been playing under a cherry tree nearby. A father lifting his toddler high into the air, the little girl's squeal ringing with pure joy. Evan's smile had appeared for a second, almost on reflex, before dissolving as quickly as it came. He turned away, his jaw tightening, his gaze falling to his empty hands. He wished he could be unmoved by the sight of families. He wished the ache didn't still live in him. But infertility wasn't just a medical diagnosis, it was a silent grief, one he carried alone in boardrooms, car rides, and quiet evenings in a mansion that echoed with nothing but his footsteps. He exhaled, long and slow, trying to release the weight inside his chest. That was when he heard footsteps, small ones, uneven ones, approaching from his right. He didn't look up at first, assuming it was a child running past, but the footsteps slowed, stopped. A soft inhale, almost rehearsed, almost hopeful. Then a tiny voice said, "Sir, is this seat taken?" Evan lifted his gaze and found not one little girl, but three. Triplets, 7 years old, standing shoulder to shoulder like a small, determined army, each dressed in a different spring dress, yellow, blue, and pink. The dresses were faded, but clean, their hair neatly brushed, though not perfectly, their eyes bright, though carrying something far older than their years. Lily, the one in yellow, had a slight limp, but she stepped forward with surprising confidence. Maya, in blue, had a tiny hearing aid tucked behind her left ear. She was already signing something to her sisters with quick, expressive fingers. Rose, in pink, leaned on a lightweight crutch, but her posture was tall, her chin lifted with a quiet kind of pride. Despite the visible hardships etched into their small bodies, they smiled, smiles brighter than the spring sun itself. Evan blinked. "There are other benches," he said, gesturing vaguely without much thought. He didn't mean it unkindly, just distantly, reflexively, but the girls didn't move. Rose spoke next, her voice soft but steady. "Those ones are in the shade. We get cold too fast." Evan hesitated. It wasn't the words, it was the way she said them. Matter of fact. No self-pity, no fear of being turned away. Just truth. Their resilience cracked something in him, something he never allowed anyone to touch. Lily sat down first, gently, as if waiting for permission that never came. Maya and Rose followed, settling in a neat line beside him. For a moment, none of them said anything. Evan felt strangely noticed. And then Lily reached into the small fabric tote she carried and pulled out a worn photograph-creased edges, smudged corners, colors fading. Evan looked at the photograph carefully, already feeling his heartbeat stumble. He knew that face. He knew those eyes. Amelia Clark, the woman he had once loved with a certainty he never felt again. The woman who vanished from his life 8 years earlier without explanation, leaving nothing but unanswered questions and a hollow space he covered with work and ambition. His breath caught. "Where did you get this?" he asked, voice low, sharper than he intended. Lily's fingers curled around the edge of her dress. Rose shifted on her crutch. Maya's eyes softened as she watched him, as if she understood more than she could say. None of them answered immediately. The silence around them tightened, delicate and fragile as a cherry blossom petal drifting on the wind. And in that moment, sitting on a park bench in the middle of a warm spring day, Evan Hale felt the first true disruption to his life in years. Not a business crisis, not a financial threat, something infinitely smaller and far more dangerous to a man who built walls to survive. 3 little girls, 1 worn photograph, and the name he had never forgotten, whispering through his mind like a ghost finally finding its way home. For a long moment, Evan couldn't bring himself to look away from the worn photograph in his hand. The soft spring breeze brushed against it, threatening to lift its fragile corner as if even the wind recognized the weight it carried. Amelia. Her warm eyes still held the same quiet kindness he remembered. The soft curls of her brown hair framed her face, just as they had 8 years ago, when she used to lean against his shoulder on park benches, just like this one. Time had aged the photo, but the memory it stirred inside him felt painfully fresh. He swallowed, realizing his fingers were trembling. When he finally looked up, the 3 little girls were watching him, not fearfully, but with an odd mixture of hope and caution, as if they were waiting to see whether he was someone safe or someone who would disappear like too many others had. Lily was the first to speak. She tilted her head slightly, her limp causing her to shift her weight from one foot to the other. "Sir, she's our mom," she said quietly, tapping the photograph with gentle reverence. "She's been missing 3 days now." Evan felt a pulse of disbelief move through him. "Your mother is Amelia Clark?" Maya nodded, then began signing rapidly. Her small hands moved with intensity, almost desperation. Rose watched her sister's fingers, then translated in a soft, trembling voice. "She says, 'We don't know where Mom went. She told us to stay close, to stay together, and she'd be right back.'" Lily's voice cracked as she added, "But she didn't come back." A chill ran down Evan's spine, not from the breeze, but from something deeper. He had spent years wondering why Amelia left him, what she had run from, or who she had been trying to protect. He had never imagined this. He stared at the girls, 3 little versions of the woman he once believed he'd build a family with. The curve of their cheeks, the softness in their eyes, even the quiet courage in their posture. It was all Amelia. It was undeniable. He took a slow breath, forcing the tumult inside him to settle enough for him to speak. "Have you talked to the police?" he asked, though he already sensed the answer. Lily's lips pressed together. "They said maybe she needed a break," she whispered. "Or maybe she went to find help." Rose added, "They said to wait in our apartment. But waiting hurts." Maya signed again, her hands softening as she motioned toward Evan. Rose interpreted, "She says, you look lonely, like us." The words hit him harder than he expected, landing deep in that quiet, hidden pocket of him he never let anyone see. Lonely. He wondered how a child, especially one who barely knew him, could see something his colleagues, board members, and acquaintances never noticed. But children did that. They saw truth without filters, And these three, they had learned to read people far too young. Evan looked back down at the photo, the edges worn by little fingers. Amelia's disappearance, these girls, their disabilities, their resilience, their mother missing for days. Something about it didn't add up, something dark underneath the surface. "Girls," he said slowly, "where were you the last time you saw her?" Lily answered, "Home. She said she'd go talk to the landlord about our rent. She promised she'd be right back." A heavy silence followed, as if the air itself hesitated. Something twisted sharply inside Evan, not guilt, but recognition. Amelia had always carried everything alone. She would rather break under the weight than burden someone she loved. "Sir?" Lily's voice pulled him back. Did you love our mom?" It was such an innocent question, spoken without agenda or manipulation, that Evan felt his breath catch again. The truth rose immediately in his chest. Yes, God, yes. It had taken him years to accept that losing Amelia carved a hollow in him nothing else could fill. Not success, not power, not even time. But he couldn't say it. Not to these girls, not now. So he looked down, his silence stretching into the space between them. And his silence, more than any words, became the answer. Lily nodded slowly, understanding. Maya looked down at her dress. Rose shifted uncomfortably on her crutch. None of them pushed him for more. Instead, Rose spoke next, her voice fragile. "Mom said, people with money can help, but they don't have to. She said kindness is a choice." Evan felt the walls he'd built over 8 years begin to crack. Not subtly, not quietly, but with the force of something inevitable. He ran a hand slowly over his jaw, trying to refocus, but the realization weighed heavily. Amelia had children. 3 children, and they were living through the same fear, uncertainty, and isolation she had always tried to shield others from. He closed the photograph, handed it gently back to Lily, and tried to steady his voice. "Girls, I don't know where your mother is, but I'll help you however I can." Even as the words left his mouth, they startled him. He had not planned to say them. He had not planned for any of this. He didn't understand what pull these girls had on him. Maybe the resemblance to Amelia, maybe their courage, maybe the loneliness they recognized in him before he even acknowledged it himself. Or maybe it was simply that they needed someone, and he was the only one sitting on that bench when they walked up. The sun dipped slightly behind a cloud, scattering the blossoms differently across the path. Lily held the photograph against her chest, her small fingers brushing its creased edges. Rose adjusted her crutch. Maya scooted a little closer on the bench, her shoulder lightly touching Evan's arm. He looked down at them. 3 little lives intertwined with a past he thought was gone forever. He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing. Nothing in his world was ever going to be the same after today. The breeze carried the faint sound of laughter from another family nearby. Evan's heart tightened again, but this time he didn't turn away. He stayed still, present, aware, and as he sat between the lives of these 3 fragile, resilient children and the memory of the woman he once loved, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, fear. Fear of what this meant. Fear of what came next. Fear that, for the first time since losing Amelia, he was being pulled into a story bigger than himself. And somewhere inside him, he knew. The wall he'd guarded for years had just cracked open, and nothing could close it again. The drive to the triplets' apartment took less than 15 minutes, but to Evan it felt like the slow descent into a world he had never truly seen. When they reached the building, the elevator was broken, of course. The stairwell smelled faintly of damp concrete and fried food from someone's dinner down the hall. Evan held the rail as they climbed, careful to match the pace of Rose's steps. Lily stayed close to Maya, who hesitated with each flicker from the hallway lights. The building groaned under its own age, and every small sound echoed too loudly. When they reached the third floor, the girls stopped. Lily lifted her chin slightly, gesturing toward a narrow hallway that stretched into dimness. "This is our floor," she said softly. The hallway light flickered again, once, twice, then steadied in a weak yellow glow. Paint peeled from the walls like old scabs. A single shoe sat abandoned near the baseboard, as though a child had outgrown it too quickly to care. That was when Evan felt it, movement, a presence. He didn't know why he noticed it first, but the hairs along his arms rose before he saw anything. Lily's limp slowed. Rose paused mid-step. Maya touched Evan's sleeve urgently, her fingers trembling. At the far end of the hallway, partially swallowed by shadow, stood a man. His back pressed casually against the wall, his foot propped up like he had been waiting there for some time. He wore a black jacket, the collar turned up. One hand tucked into his pocket, the other loosely holding a cigarette that burned in lazy spirals. But it was his eyes, dark, unblinking, fixed on them with a level of interest that felt wrong, that made Evan's pulse sharpen. The man didn't pretend not to see them, didn't look away, didn't shift. He simply watched, staring through the dim hallway as if he were evaluating something he knew he shouldn't touch, but fully intended to. A slow, crooked smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't even curious. It was the smirk of someone who enjoyed being a threat. Lily froze completely. Her voice was barely audible. "He's here a lot, just watching." Rose tightened her grip on her crutch, shifting closer to her sisters. Maya pressed her hands to her hearing aid, as if trying to block out the world around her. Evan felt something unfamiliar twist sharply in his chest protectiveness. It rose so fast it nearly startled him. Stepping forward instinctively, he shifted his body between the man and the girls, his voice dropping into something cold and steady. "Inside," he said firmly. "Now." His tone allowed no argument. He unlocked their apartment door with a key Lily handed him. As soon as the girls slipped inside, Evan turned once more to look down the hall. The man hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't acknowledged Evan's presence beyond that eerie smirk. Then, in a low voice carried just faintly across the quiet hallway, he murmured something under his breath. Too quiet to make out, but unmistakably hostile. A chill swept through Evan, cold as a winter gust. He shut the door and threw the deadbolt. Inside, the air was heavier than he expected, as though the apartment itself had been holding its breath. The single-room unit was dim, lit by a single lamp in the corner. A thin mattress lay in the center of the floor with a faded blanket, creased from the weight of 3 small bodies huddled together at night. The walls bore faint outlines where pictures had once hung. A cracked window rattled softly in the wind. That was when the contrast struck Evan hardest. His Rolex, flawless, expensive, polished, caught the light as he reached toward the kitchen counter. Next to it was a nearly empty cereal box. When he lifted it, only a few crumbs rattled inside. A refrigerator door hung slightly off its hinge. Inside, half a jar of mustard and an expired carton of milk. That was it. Nothing else. Nothing that could feed growing children. Lily watched him, her eyes wide and solemn. "Mom tried her best," she whispered, as though apologizing for a truth she didn't cause. Rose nodded. "She always said we were enough, but we didn't have much." Maya touched her sister's hands, grounding them again in that quiet, unspoken way she had. Before Evan could speak, a knock rattled the door. The girls stiffened instantly. Their breath hitched in collective fear. But it wasn't the man from the hallway, thankfully. When Evan opened the door, a woman stepped inside, holding a worn briefcase and looking exhausted enough to collapse. Her badge clipped to her coat read, Dana Wells, Child Protective Services. She took one look around the apartment and sighed heavily. "This building again?" she muttered, then turned to the girls with a kind smile that couldn't hide her worry. "Lily, Maya, Rose, I've been looking for you." The girls moved closer to Evan. It struck him then they trusted him. A stranger they'd met less than an hour ago. Dana rubbed her temples as she scanned the crumbling walls, the empty jars, the thin blanket. "They can't stay here," she said, voice tight. "I'm sorry, but it's not safe. They'll have to be placed in emergency foster homes tonight." She hesitated then, her gaze flicking from the crumbling walls to the three small girls clutching one another on the thin mattress. "The only problem is," she added more quietly, "it's late. Finding 3 beds in the same home on short notice is almost impossible. If no placement opens up before midnight, they'll have to stay here one more night while we keep calling." "I don't like it," she admitted, rubbing at the crease between her brows. "But this is how the system works when it's already stretched too thin." The words landed like a slap across the room. Lily's face drained of color. Rose's knuckles whitened around her crutch. Maya shook her head vigorously, signing in frantic, uneven motions. Lily translated through tears. "She says no. Please, we can't be apart." Dana's voice softened, but her expression remained pained. "I know, sweetheart. But without a relative or legal guardian, there's no choice." She glanced toward the door, her voice dropping. "And that man out there? He's been reported before. Multiple times. Unpredictable. He hangs around vulnerable tenants, but without evidence, there's nothing we can do." Evan swallowed, feeling something burn in his chest. Rage, fear, a sense of injustice that he had spent years keeping neatly walled off. How had Amelia kind, gentle Amelia ended up here? And how had these 3 tiny warriors survived a place that saw only weakness in them? The girls looked up at him then, all 3 pairs of eyes filled with fragile hope. "Sir," Lily whispered, barely audible, "will you come back tomorrow?" Evan turned his head briefly toward the door, toward the darkness where the man had stood watching them. Something shifted inside him, something final. Some part of him he thought had died 8 years ago began to reawaken. The sun had barely touched the horizon when Evan's eyes opened, long before his alarm was ever meant to sound. For years, his mornings had followed a strict rhythm. Wake at 6, gym at 6:30, conference calls by 8, the day unfolding in clean, predictable lines. But today, none of that mattered. Not the contracts waiting for his signature, not the investor breakfast he was supposed to lead, not the portfolio review sitting on his nightstand. He had promised them, promised he would return. And though Evan Hale was a man who avoided promises precisely because breaking them felt unforgivable, this one had lodged itself in him like a heartbeat. He rose, grabbed his keys, and walked out into the still dark morning. By the time he reached their apartment building, the alley cats were still prowling, and the early buses had not yet begun to groan down the main street. The hallway light was dimmer than he remembered, flickering like it was losing the will to shine. For a brief moment, Evan wondered if the man from the night before, the one who watched from the shadows, might still be lurking. But the hallway was empty, silent except for a distant television muffled behind a closed door. Still, he felt the tension in the air, the kind that clings to buildings where survival is a daily negotiation. He knocked gently on the triplets' door, expecting them to be asleep. They weren't. The door creaked open slowly, and three small silhouettes huddled together came into view. Lily's eyes were red, as though she had never closed them. Maya clung to the hem of her sister's dress. Rose leaned heavily on her crutch, her lips trembling in a soft, exhausted smile. "You came back," Lily whispered, as if afraid the words might dissolve if spoken too loudly. Evan didn't trust himself to speak, so he only nodded. Rose pressed a hand over her chest in relief, and a quiet puff of breath escaped Maya. A silent thank you. "Pack what you need," Evan said gently. "You're coming with me." The words felt surreal. They carried weight he hadn't fully processed, yet he meant every one. Lily grabbed her small tote. Rose slipped her arm through the strap of a faded pink backpack. Maya gathered the few books they shared, and, together, they stepped into the hallway, the apartment door closing behind them with a finality that made Evan's skin tighten. He didn't know that he was closing the door on their old life, but he felt it. At the clinic, sunlight spilled through wide glass windows as nurses and doctors hustled through morning protocols. Dr. Patel, a woman with kind eyes and confident hands, approached them wearing a warm smile. "These must be the girls you called about," she said. Her gaze swept over them, Lily's limp, Maya's hearing aid, Rose's crutch with a clinical precision softened by deep compassion. After brief introductions, she led them to a brightly lit exam room decorated with cartoon animals and paper butterflies taped to the cabinets. As they settled, Maya reached for Lily's hand. Rose positioned her crutch within reach but sat stiffly, bracing herself. Evan stood nearby, unsure how to help, feeling the odd urge to protect them from even the smallest discomfort. Dr. Patel began with Lily, checking reflexes and mobility. Then she moved to Maya, testing hearing responses. When she prepared a small syringe for routine blood work, all three girls stiffened simultaneously, not out of fear for themselves, but out of fear for each other. Dr. Patel paused mid-motion, observing the scene with awe. "I've worked with hundreds of children," she said softly, "but these three, they protect one another better than most adults I know." She nodded toward Lily. "When I gave her the shot, Maya and Rose held her hands so tightly I thought their fingers might bruise." Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve and attempted a brave smile. Maya leaned her head on Lily's shoulder. Rose positioned herself slightly in front, her crutch angled protectively, like a small soldier guarding her battalion. Evan swallowed hard, feeling something in him shift yet again. When the exams were done, Dr. Patel stepped back with a heavy sigh. "They're underweight," she said, "and their injuries require ongoing care. Nothing dire, thankfully, but they'll need stability, good food, consistent support. Their mother must have been doing everything she could, but doing it alone, that takes a toll." Evan nodded, though his chest tightened as he imagined Amelia facing all of this without help. Just then, his phone buzzed. Dana's voice crackled through the speaker. "Evan, we found a lead. Someone using Amelia's ID boarded a bus heading north out of the city. It's not definitive, but it's the first real trace we've had." Rose heard enough to understand. She latched onto Evan's sleeve with sudden desperation. "Please, take us with you," she begged. "Please don't leave us." Lily pressed against his side. Maya tugged at his coat, signing rapidly with trembling hands. Lily translated, tears welling in her eyes. "She says, 'We'll be brave if you stay.'" Evan turned to them, struck by the trust shining through their fear-trust, given to him without condition, without hesitation. Something inside him clicked into place. a decision that felt less like a choice and more like a truth rising from somewhere deep inside. He looked at all three girls, then exhaled the kind of breath that comes right before stepping into irreversible moments. "All right," he said quietly. "You're coming with me." The relief that poured across their faces was so overwhelming that Evan almost had to look away. Lily threw her arms around him, surprising them both. Maya covered her mouth with her hands, eyes shining. Rose leaned against him, unsteady but comforted, and in that fragile, extraordinary moment, Evan realized that this was no longer just about helping them. It was about stepping into a battle they had been fighting alone for far too long. As they walked out of the clinic, sunlight warmed the sidewalk, painting soft shadows beneath their feet. The world outside bustled, ordinary and indifferent, but for Evan, everything had shifted. He had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. He didn't know what dangers awaited them, what truths he would uncover, or what part he was meant to play in this story that began with a single question. Is this seat taken? But he knew this. He had already chosen. And whatever came next, he would face it not as a distant observer, but as their protector, their anchor, the one person who had returned when everyone else disappeared. The drive to Evan's mansion should have felt long. Yet for the triplets, pressed together in the back seat, their small faces half-shadowed by the passing streetlights, it felt like they were traveling through a different world entirely. A world where the fear of the man in the hallway didn't reach them, where hunger wasn't gnawing at their stomachs, where being separated wasn't the nightmare waiting just around the corner. They watched the city landscape change with wide eyes, old brick buildings giving way to storefronts, storefronts giving way to quiet residential streets, and finally the tall iron gate that opened slowly as cameras recognized Evan's license plate. Rose let out the tiniest gasp. Maya squeezed Lily's hand. Lily whispered, half in awe, "It looks like a palace." Evan wasn't sure what he expected them to feel. Overwhelm, maybe, or fear at the size of the place. But what he saw instead was wonder pure, stretching wonder flickering across three tired faces that had only known survival. As the car rolled up the stone driveway, the mansion loomed ahead, its long windows glowing in the dusk light, the manicured lawn lined with soft lanterns. When the doors opened and the girls stepped out, their footsteps echoed faintly, as if the house itself had never learned to welcome small feet. He guided them inside, pushing open the heavy front door. The foyer stretched upward like a museum atrium, marble floors polished to a cold, perfect shine. Light fixtures glowed in deliberate symmetry. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old wealth. And yet, for all its grandeur, the house felt hollow. It always had. He had lived there for years, yet never once did it feel lived in. No photos on the walls, no toys, no unattended mugs on the coffee table, no signs that life happened here, only success. He led them to the living room. It was vast, with vaulted ceilings and sleek gray furniture arranged perfectly, as though untouched by actual human use. The kind of room that designers loved and people rarely dared to sit in. The girls hovered near the doorway, unsure if they were allowed to enter. Evan realized this and cleared his throat. "You can come in," he said gently. "Everything is for you to use. Don't worry about anything." Lily stepped forward first, still clutching her tote bag, then sat carefully on one corner of the couch. Maya followed, lowering herself slowly, testing the cushions as if they might swallow her. Rose settled between them, her crutch leaning against the armrest. It took less than 5 minutes for the room to shift. Lily's tote spilled open, revealing a small pencil, a broken crayon, and 2 frayed picture books. Maya fixated on the large window, tracing the condensation rings made by her breath. Rose gently tapped her crutch against the marble floor, softly, experimentally, as if making sure it wouldn't echo too loudly. And then it happened. A sound Evan had never heard inside these walls. A laugh, a small one, but real. Later, after dinner, simple sandwiches that the girls devoured as if they hadn't eaten a real meal in days. Evan showed them the guest room he had prepared on instinct. The room was plain but spacious, with a soft queen bed, clean sheets, and thick curtains drawn to block the night. The girls climbed onto the bed together immediately, huddling in the center like a small nest. Evan stepped inside quietly, noticing something on the nightstand, a drawing. One he hadn't seen before. Rose held it up shyly when she realized where he was looking. The picture showed a tall man holding 3 small hands under cherry trees. The triplets. And in the center, unmistakably, him. His heart clutched painfully. Rose whispered, "I drew it at the clinic. I didn't know if you'd stay, but I hoped." Evan opened his mouth, but no words formed. Instead, he forced himself to focus on tidying up the room, straightening blankets, adjusting pillows, simple tasks that gave him something to do while he fought the weight rising behind his eyes. But then, while wiping a spot of juice from the living room floor, sticky residue from a spill he somehow missed, he noticed something tucked beneath Rose's drawing pad. A folded piece of paper. He frowned, sat on the floor, and reached for it. His breath stalled the moment he saw the handwriting. Amelia's. There was no mistaking it. Curved letters, soft strokes, her signature slant. With trembling hands, he unfolded the note. "Evan, if you ever find them, protect them. I left because I was pregnant with 3, and I knew your family would try to ruin them for not being perfect. Forgive me. Amelia." He read it twice, then a third time. Each line hit harder than the last. Pregnant, with triplets. And his family, his cold, ruthless lineage, would have crushed her, crushed them, with expectations and perfectionism. Amelia had known his world too well, and she had chosen to protect the children at the cost of her own happiness and his. A single tear escaped before he could stop it, landing on the paper and blurring part of Amelia's name. He wiped his eyes quickly, angry at himself for feeling anything at all, yet more overwhelmed than he had ever been. He sat there on the polished floor for several minutes, the mansion's silence pressing in on him like a confession. These girls weren't just Amelia's children. They were his past, his unanswered story, his second chance, though he didn't dare admit that to himself yet. When he returned to the guest room, the triplets had arranged themselves in their familiar triangle. Lily in the middle as the anchor, Maya curled near the pillows, Rose laying her crutch on the nightstand before settling down. Lily lifted her head sleepily. "Sir, can we stay here forever?" she whispered. "Forever." The word struck him with a force that stole his breath. He looked at them, 3 small figures on a bed far too big for them, but filling it with more warmth than this house had ever known. He stepped closer, tucking the blanket around their shoulders. "I'll try," he whispered. And he meant it. More than anything he had ever meant. Morning broke quietly over the city, a soft wash of pale gold slipping between the curtains of Evan's bedroom. The house was unusually still. No footsteps, no laughter, no little fingers tapping on windows. For a moment he feared something had happened. Then he checked the guest room. All 3 girls were still asleep, breathing softly, their chests rising and falling in uneven rhythms. Lily had an arm thrown protectively over her sister's. Maya lay curled tightly, cheek pressed against the pillow. Rose clutched her crutch, even in sleep, as if it were a lifeline. The sight warmed him unexpectedly, stirring something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, a sense of belonging. He stepped away quietly, reluctant to disturb them. But as he reached the hallway, his phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. The caller ID flashed Dana Wells. He answered immediately. "What is it?" His voice was already tense. Dana didn't bother with greetings. "Evan, we found her. Amelia." The world seemed to still around him. He gripped the railing to steady himself. "Where?" "She's at the county hospital," Dana said, her tone heavy. "Severe exhaustion, malnutrition, but she's alive." A slow breath escaped him, carrying years of questions he never expected to answer. "I'm on my way," he said, already turning toward the guest room. The girls were waking when he entered, their eyes blinking open, confusion quickly shifting to relief as they recognized him. "Are we still here?" Lily asked, rubbing her eyes. "Yes," Evan said gently. "And you're coming with me. We found your mother." Rose sat up so quickly her crutch clattered to the floor. Maya gasped in silence, her hands flying to her chest before she started signing frantically. Lily translated through a trembling smile. "She says, thank you for finding her." "We haven't seen her yet," Evan said softly. "But we will. Together." The drive to the hospital was nearly silent. Lily held the photograph of Amelia against her heart. Rose stared out the window, her lips pressed tight. Maya watched the passing buildings with wide, fearful eyes. When the hospital came into view, Maya signed something urgently. Lily translated. "She asks, is Mommy hurt?" Evan hesitated, not wanting to lie, not wanting to frighten them. "She's tired," he said gently, "very tired, but she's waiting for you." In the hospital lobby, Dana met them with paperwork in hand, her expression softening at the sight of the girls. "She's on the 3rd floor," she said. "Room 312. She's stable, but fragile. We'll take it slow." As they started toward the elevators, Dana fell into step beside Evan. "That bus lead we chased," she murmured. "Dead end. Someone stole her wallet and used her ID to get out of town. She didn't make it to the station at all. She collapsed on the sidewalk a few blocks from the shelter. An ambulance brought her here sometime after midnight." Her eyes shone with a tight, tired anger. She's been fighting for them even as her body was giving out. The moment Evan opened the door, the sterile scent of antiseptic washed over them. The quiet hum of machines, the dim lighting, the fragile shape lying under thin hospital blankets. Amelia. Even in her weakened state, even with her hair tangled and skin pale, the familiarity of her features struck Evan like a blow. The softness of her eyes, the curve of her cheek, the gentle rise of her breath. It was all Amelia, and yet it wasn't the Amelia he remembered. This version carried exhaustion carved deep into her bones, the kind of exhaustion born from years of running, protecting, sacrificing. The triplets froze. For a second, none of them moved. Then Lily stepped forward, voice trembling. "Mommy, we're here." Amelia's eyelids fluttered weakly. Her breathing hitched. Slowly, painfully slowly, her eyes opened. She scanned the room, confused at first, until her gaze landed on her daughters. Her lips parted in a soft, broken whisper. "Lily!" That one word shattered the room. Rose rushed forward, nearly tripping over her crutch. Maya threw herself onto the bed, tears streaming silently as she pressed her cheek to Amelia's arm. Lily grasped her mother's hand with both of hers, sobbing openly. Amelia raised her trembling fingers to brush her daughter's hair, touching them as though she feared they might vanish. Then her gaze lifted and found Evan. Her breath caught. A mixture of relief, Guilt and sorrow flickered across her face. "Evan." His name fell from her lips like an apology. "I always hoped you'd find them." He stepped closer, unable to form a single coherent thought. "Amelia, what happened? Why didn't you come to me?" Amelia's eyes filled with tears, not the quick, panicked kind, but the slow-burning grief that slips out after years of holding truth captive. "I wasn't running from you," she whispered. "I was running from him." "Who?" Evan asked sharply. Amelia swallowed, her voice trembling. "Eric Malone, the landlord's son. One night he came to the door with a stack of papers," she went on, her eyes filling. "He said the landlord had signed off on a special agreement, lower payments now, the rest spread out over time. I was so tired, Evan. The girls were sick, I was working nights, and we were already 3 weeks overdue. I didn't read every line. I just saw the words rent, arrears, extension, and I signed." Her fingers tightened in the blanket as if she were still holding the pen. "Later, when I finally looked, I saw what he'd slipped in, a clause that said if I defaulted again, I would cooperate with any placement recommendations made in the best interest of the children by Eric Malone as the building's tenant liaison. He underlined those words, told me, 'You just admitted you can't provide for them. That means I get a say in where they go.'" A tear slid down her cheek. "He doesn't have that right, not really. But when you're broke and one step from the street, and someone waves a signature with your name on it, it feels like they own your whole life, and your children's." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. Evan felt a cold, crawling dread move under his skin, the same dread he'd felt in the hallway of the apartment building. "The man in the shadows," he whispered, "the one watching the girls." Amelia nodded weakly. "He's dangerous, Evan. Please, don't let him near them." Maya clutched her mother tighter. Rose looked up, fear tightening her small face. Lily's voice broke. "Mommy, we were so scared." Evan steadied himself, placing a firm hand on the railing of the bed. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "All of you. I won't let anyone hurt you." Amelia looked up at him then, truly seeing him, not the CEO, not the man she once loved, but the protector standing between her daughters and the world that failed them. "Evan, I didn't want you pulled into this," she whispered, "but I had no one else." He shook his head slowly. "You should have come. You should have trusted me." He paused, voice softening. "But I understand why you didn't." For a long, fragile moment, the only sound was the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Then Amelia reached for his hand with trembling fingers. "Protect them," she whispered. "Please." And with those words, everything changed. The drive back to Evan's estate that afternoon felt different, sharper, heavier, charged with a tension he hadn't felt since the early days of building his company, when every decision could make or break his entire future. By the time they reached the mansion, security teams Evan had called ahead were already present. 2 SUVs parked near the gate, uniformed officers scanning the perimeter, and a pair of private guards posted by the front door. Their presence startled the triplets. Lily stiffened as she got out of the car. Rose clung to her crutch with wide eyes. Maya tucked herself against Evan's side. "It's okay," Evan reassured softly. "They're here to protect you. No one will hurt you. Not anymore." Once inside, Evan gathered his staff, the head of security, his personal attorney, and Mark Fulton, his chief of operations, who had rushed over the moment he heard the situation. They met in the study, the door closed, the girls resting on the couch just outside the room where they could see Evan through the glass pane, but not hear the tense discussion unfolding. Mark looked shaken. "Eric Malone?" he repeated, flipping through the report Evan's team had compiled in under an hour. "This guy has 2 arrests for intimidation, 1 for assault, and an ongoing investigation for predatory behavior toward tenants." He glanced up. "This is serious, Evan." "It's more than serious," Evan replied. "He threatened Amelia, he threatened the girls, and I'm not waiting for him to make the next move." His attorney adjusted her glasses. "We can file for emergency guardianship based on the mother's condition, the children's vulnerability, the unsafe environment, and the ongoing threat. Especially with your resources and ability to provide stable care, the court will take you seriously." She paused thoughtfully. "But if you pursue this, your life will change permanently. There's no temporary version of what you're stepping into." Evan didn't hesitate. "My life changed the moment they sat beside me on that bench." Outside the study window, the triplets had begun cutting cherry blossom shapes out of colored paper. Lily pink, Maya blue, Rose yellow, placing them carefully on the coffee table, like offerings of innocence in a house, learning to feel warm again. Maya looked up when she caught Evan staring through the glass and gave him a small, shy wave. The gesture disarmed him so completely he had to look away. Security was reinforced within the hour. Additional cameras were activated, motion sensors adjusted, guards on rotating shifts stationed at the main entry points, every vulnerable angle reviewed. Even the long driveway leading into the property was reconfigured with an added checkpoint. Evan signed the necessary orders without flinching, each signature echoing one silent vow. You will not touch them again. But danger had a way of moving faster than preparation. Then a guard appeared in the doorway, face tight, voice low. "Mr. Hale, we have someone at the front gate." Evan stood instantly. "Who?" The guard swallowed. "He won't give his name at first, but he's yelling it now. Sir, it's Eric Malone." A hush fell over the room. Lily's eyes widened in terror. Rose grabbed Evan's arm, her hands shaking violently. Maya's breath hitched as she began signing frantically rapid, frightened motions that Lily struggled to keep up with. "She says he's here," Lily whispered, voice cracking. "She says, please don't let him take us." Evan moved toward the window overlooking the long driveway. Eric stood at the gate, fists pounding against the metal bars. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his stance wild and unhinged. 2 security officers stood between him and the estate, but it didn't stop Eric from leaning forward and screaming up toward the mansion like a man unhinged. "You think you can keep them from me? You think you can hide them? They belong to me. Those kids are mine to deal with." The door to the outside buzzed briefly as someone tried to force entry. The alarm indicator flashed red for a moment before guards secured the lock. Rose gasped. Lily whimpered. Maya pressed her hands over her ears. Evan stood, then slow, measured, every line of his body transforming from protector to defender. He walked to the intercom panel by the foyer, pressed the speaker button, and spoke with a calmness that cut through the panic in the room like a blade. "Eric Malone," he said, his voice low and cold. "This is the last time you will ever come near these children." Eric let out a harsh laugh. "You think you can stop me, rich boy? You think money makes you invincible?" Evan's jaw tightened. "No, but it makes you powerless." Eric froze. A flicker of fear or fury crossed his face. "I've documented every threat, every attempt to extort their mother," Evan continued. "Your arrests, your history, your behavior today. The police are already on their way, and when they arrive, you won't be able to terrorize anyone ever again." Eric snarled, lunging toward the gate. The motion sensors tripped instantly. Security engaged. And as Eric made one final attempt to vault the barrier, a guard tackled him to the ground, just as police sirens pierced the air. The girls watched from inside the house, trembling in a tight cluster, as Eric was pinned down, cuffed, and hauled to his feet. Lily pressed against Evan's side, tears streaking her cheeks. Maya leaned into him silently. Rose gripped his hand so tightly, her knuckles turned white. When the officers finally drove away with Eric in the back seat, a long, breathless silence filled the room. Evan knelt again, pulling all three girls close. "He won't hurt you," he whispered. "Not now, not ever." Lily buried her face in his shoulder. Rose sobbed quietly. Maya wrapped her arms around his neck in a shaky embrace that felt much stronger than her small frame should have allowed. And Evan closed his eyes, realizing the truth as it settled over him like a vow he didn't need to say aloud. These girls weren't just under his protection, they were under his heart. And from this moment forward, nothing, no threat, no fear, no past would be allowed to take them away. Spring returned slowly that year, as if the world itself needed time to believe that warmth could truly come back after a long, bruising winter. Outside the county courthouse, cherry trees bloomed in soft clusters, their petals drifting on the breeze like tiny blessings carried on the air. Inside, beneath high ceilings and softly echoing footsteps, Evan Hale walked with the triplets on either side of him. Lily holding his left hand, Rose holding his right, and Maya tucked between her sisters, her tiny fingers wrapped securely around their palms. In the weeks since Eric Malone's arrest, the investigation had rolled out faster than anyone expected. Evan's evidence, the documented threats, the video recordings from the security gate, the testimony from tenants, terrified for years, had built a case so solid that the judge ordered Eric held without bail. He awaited trial now on multiple charges: extortion, child endangerment, intimidation, and attempted forced entry. Amelia, still regaining her strength, had testified through a written statement, her words trembling yet firm. "I feared for my daughters," she wrote. "I feared what he would do. Evan saved us. He saved them." The courtroom hushed at the sight, three small bodies folding into their mother's arms, Amelia pressing kisses into their hair with trembling hands. Evan stood back, watching the moment unfold with a tightness in his chest he didn't try to hide. The judge entered shortly after, an older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She surveyed the courtroom, her gaze falling briefly on Evan, then on Amelia, then on the triplets, who sat together like a single living portrait of resilience. When the hearing began, the judge read through the case details, the emergency motions, the psychological evaluations, the police reports, and the social workers' recommendations. Evan listened quietly. Amelia held her daughters close, fingers trembling slightly as she traced small circles on their backs. But when the judge looked directly at Evan, his pulse spiked. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice steady but not unkind, "you understand the weight of what you are taking on? Guardian, provider, protector. These girls will look to you for stability, for safety, for guidance, and for love. This is not a temporary responsibility." Evan stood slowly, smoothing the front of his navy suit. The courtroom seemed to still around him. He glanced at the triplets, Lily with her earnest eyes, Rose resting her cheek on her crutch handle, Maya signing nervously into her lap. Then he looked at Amelia, who held his gaze with something like gratitude and sorrow woven into one. He drew a breath. "I understand," he said. "I understand more than I ever thought I could. These girls, they chose me before I knew what that meant, and I'm choosing them, with all that I am." His voice softened, cracking just slightly. I won't leave, I won't falter, and I won't let them walk through this world alone ever again." Lily's lips parted in a silent gasp. Rose blinked hard. Maya reached for Evan's sleeve instinctively. Amelia, tears shimmering in her eyes, whispered from her seat, "They chose him long before I did." The judge nodded slowly, thoughtfully, and then turned the page in front of her. "Then it is the ruling of this court," she announced, "that guardianship of Lily Clark, Maya Clark, and Rose Clark be granted permanently to Mr. Evan Hale." She turned to Amelia gently. "Miss Clark, once you have recovered medically and established safe housing, you will share joint custody. These children belong to both of you together." The triplets erupted, 3 little voices crying out at once, tears spilling, arms reaching. Lily leapt forward first, throwing herself into Evan's arms. Rose followed, nearly knocking him backward, her crutch clattering onto the floor. Maya pressed her cheek to his chest, her hands signing over and over again, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." He couldn't understand the signs fully, but he understood the meaning. He felt it in the tremble of her shoulders, in the way her fingers curled into his shirt, in the way the courtroom blurred through his tears. "Yes," he whispered, voice breaking completely now. "I'm here." When the hearing ended, the hallway outside the courtroom filled with soft chatter, but for Evan and the girls, the world had narrowed into something warm and bright. At the park entrance, Evan stopped by a bench, the same style of bench where everything had begun. Lily touched his hand. "Sir," she whispered shyly, "remember when we asked if the seat was taken?" Evan smiled, a soft, steady smile that reached all the way into the parts of him he thought were permanently closed. "Yes," he murmured, "I remember." Maya held out a small card she'd been working on for days, a card decorated with 3 colored blossoms, yellow, blue, pink. She signed something sweet, then pointed to the handwritten words on the front. "The seat next to us is yours, always." His voice faltered. "Thank you," he whispered, swallowing the sudden swell of emotion. "Thank you, my brave girls." The triplets ran ahead toward the trees, laughing in the way only children who feel safe can laugh free, unguarded, full of light. Amelia watched from a bench nearby, her smile soft. Evan stood next to her, hands in his pockets, heart strangely full. "You saved them," she said quietly. He shook his head. "They saved me first." But it didn't end there. 2 months later, in a small ceremony attended by doctors, teachers, social workers, and families from every corner of the city, Evan unveiled a new foundation, its logo, 3 intertwined blossoms, the Triplets Foundation, supporting children with disabilities and families in crisis. Older donors wept. Volunteers signed up in waves. Amelia cried openly when she saw the girls' names engraved on the plaque, and the triplets standing on stage in matching dresses, holding hands, beamed with pride. Later that night, in the quiet glow of the mansion's living room, Evan watched the 3 girls twirl beneath the chandelier, laughing, dancing, scattering warmth like tiny lanterns. He whispered into the soft hum of the room, "You didn't just save my life. You gave it back to me." And for once the house didn't echo. It answered with laughter. And that's where this story settles for now. I don't know about you, but this one sat heavy on my heart in the best way. Sometimes the family we're meant to have finds us when our guard is down. This story reminds us that love isn't built from perfection, but from showing up, protecting one another, and choosing kindness even when it costs us. In the end, the seat next to us becomes home. What part of this story stayed with you? Was there a moment that made you pause? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments, friend. If this story moved you even a little, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps keep these stories alive. And don't head out yet. There are more inspiring stories waiting for you on the end screen and in the playlist. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'm Flint, wishing you warmth, good company, and a soft place to land. I'll be right here with another story soon.